इसकी आज से शुरुआत होने जा रही है और इसको लेकर एक प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस की शुरुआत हो चुकी है। केंद्रीय मंत्री प्रकाश जावड़ेकर इस वक्त उस प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस को संबोधित कर रहे हैं। आइए सीधे सुनते हैं।
Bring out one fact very clearly that be it climate change, be it desertification, and be it biodiversity destruction, human actions have played a role in disturbing the balance of nature. And now people have realized this is the 25th year of UN Convention on Combating Desertification. So people have now realized, and therefore we are saying if human actions have caused some damage, positive human actions will undo that and will make a better world for future generations. This is actually the theme around which this CCD works. Nearly 190 countries are participating, nearly 100 ministers are participating. Our Prime Minister will inaugurate it on high-level segment on 9th September. And more importantly, there will be a thorough discussion, essentially, to understand the problem and to learn from each other. Because that's how coming together at a world platform helps every country. We need not reinvent. We can share our good stories, experiences, good or bad, success and failures, and therefore we can leapfrog for a good start in each country. And therefore, this UNCCD COP is very important, and we expect some good outcomes which will be notified in Delhi Declaration. At the end of the session, after much discussion, that will be passed, and that declaration will form the future course of action. India will assume presidency today and will continue to be president for next 2 years, during which time India commits that we will make sure that there is more proactive global cooperation, because there are little different shades in all the three problems, as I mentioned. Climate change is a global problem with global impact. So it has to be treated also globally. Every nation has to do something. Here, land degradation, because land is local, and so the problem becomes local, and solutions also have to be found out locally, but there is science, technology, and as well as there is international experience which can be shared, and that benefits every country. And biodiversity, we have to protect it. It's a different issue again, but we have to protect it. If we do stop desertification or be making positive efforts to stop degradation of land, if we protect the biodiversity and improve upon it, and if we take mitigation and adaptation action in climate change, world will be really better for future generations, because 200 years there was damage done. Now we have to restore, and that is the mission of this COP14. That's all from my side. Over to
Thank you very much, Minister. Namaste. We are really delighted to be here in India, and I would like, first of all, to thank very much the Minister Prakash Javdekar as host to the 14th session of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification Conference of the Parties. Every 2 years, one of the 197 parties hosts the COP. And we are very fortunate to be here in India. You have seen by yourself the conditions that we have been provided for to work in. This is undoubtedly going to be the largest COP ever organized by the UNCCD. As of this morning, we have more than 7,300 participants registered. I think we will beat the 8,000. As the minister said, we have a long list of ministers from around the world that are confirmed to the high-level segment next week. And we also have a long list of leaders from the United Nations participating, including the number 2 of the United Nations, Deputy Secretary General, as well as heads of other UN agencies and non-UN agencies, and also the heads of the global financing systems for the environment and climate change. We are really excited that this year we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, and that at this COP we will also lay the ground to look at the next 25 to 30 years. Where are we going to be by 2050 in terms of land issues? This convention is the only global treaty dealing with land. And we know that land feeds people. 99.7% of the food we eat is coming from land. And it is extremely important that we continue to keep feeding the world. We will be close to 10 billion people. And there is no doubt that these people have to be fed. The question is, what are we going to do to feed these people without further depleting on the precious resources of ours? Already with the current population, we have, unfortunately, degraded 25% of the land, according to the latest science, unusable anymore. And 75% of the land we live in has been somehow altered from its initial stage by human activities, as the minister said before. So if we as human beings, with the intelligence of ours and with the technology that we have today, are not able to reverse that trend, when are we going to do it, and what are we going to leave to the next generations? Therefore, this COP is about the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, but it is also about jobs, it is about health, it is about prosperity, it is about security, it is about migration, international cooperation, because the interconnections between land and every single issue that we are dealing with from the 17 Sustainable Development Goals has been made clear. Therefore, this COP will also send a very clear message through the Delhi Declaration that the minister referred to, that we as human beings should be able to reverse the trend and invest massively on land restoration. And by doing so, we will create millions of green jobs, because land restoration is a labor-intensive activity. And by restoring land, we will be stocking the carbon. Up to 1/3 of the carbon that we have emitted can be stored through land restoration. Therefore, by combating desertification and restoring land, we are also contributing to the solution to climate. And by restoring land, we are also conserving biodiversity and restoring land that can continue to feed our people. As you know, when there is scarcity of resources, with a growing population where the demand on resources is increasing and the availability of these resources or the same resources is shrinking due to degradation and climate change, this leads to conflicts and competition over access to land and water throughout the world. And that competition can be observed locally or it can have an international dimension. Therefore, land restoration is also a contributor to peace and security in the world. I would like to finish by saying that with the issues that we are dealing with here, some stand out as very important today. Chief of them is the issue of drought. You know, it is the ecosystems that we have out there that are providing us with the water we drink and with the water we use for agriculture and our industry. And with droughts, we have severe shortages of water from around the world. With droughts, we have more forest fires. With droughts, we have our animals are suffering, our economies are being affected by drought. So it is absolutely essential that this convention, which is a convention on drought and desertification, gives us a very clear guidance. This conference of the parties provides us with a very clear guidance on how to address this issue of drought, better early warning systems, better preparedness, and better recovery plans when droughts occur. I grew up in a region of the world in West Africa where we were having droughts once every 10 years, once every 15 years. Today, we have drought every other year. And many people associate that phenomenon with the climate change. So it is even more important now than before that actually we deal with this fundamental issue of drought. The second issue, which I think will attract also a lot of attention at this conference of the parties, is the issue of land tenure. With 10 billion people, we have more demand on a finite resource. Are we going to continue to deplete the resources that we should be leaving to our next generations, or are we going to produce and consume differently? So it is one of the topics that, again, the world expects this conference of the parties to come up with a very, very clear guidance on how these issues will be tackled. Minister, we are very, very happy to be here. All the participants that we have received so far are extremely happy, and I think this will be an exceedingly positive COP, because the success of a COP depends, of course, on the subject and the difficulty of the subject, but it depends also on the atmosphere, because we are human beings, and the way we operate, the way we negotiate, is largely influenced by the conditions on which we negotiate. Thank you very much for putting all the conditions. The platform is there. If there is anything missing, it will be probably from the Secretariat or from another party, but not from the host country. Thank you.
Today in press, you will be directing more questions to Executive Secretary UNCCD, as I am available to you every time. And therefore, today you can ask him questions. Just 1 minute summary in Hindi, because I got the message. For TV they wanted. So, दुनिया भर में बंजर जमीन और बढ़ती बंजर जमीन ये एक समस्या है, और बंजर जमीन ज़्यादा पानी के उपयोग से भी होती है, कम पानी से भी होती है, जमीन खिसक जाती है, बह जाती है, उसके कारण भी होती है, उसके साथ साथ डिफॉरेस्टेशन से भी होता है, और बहुत सारे मुद्दे हैं जिसके कारण ज़मीन बंजर होती है। अब बंजर ज़मीन को फिर से फर्टाइल बनाना, उसको फसल ले सकने जैसा बनाना, ये बहुत ज़रूरी है, संभव है। विज्ञान ने, तकनीक ने और मनुष्यों की प्रतिभा ने ये संभव किया है। तो ये जो आज पूरे दुनिया के लोग इस विषय में चर्चा करने के लिए आ रहे हैं, आने वाले 12 दिन ये COP14 पूरे दुनिया का एक मेला यहाँ लगेगा। उसमें 190 से ज़्यादा देश के प्रतिनिधि आए हैं अभी, और 100 लगभग मंत्री आएंगे, और अपने देश के प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी इसके उच्च स्तरीय जो बैठक होती है 9 तारीख को, उसमें उसका उद्घाटन करेंगे। और इससे जो नवनीत निकलेगा, जो उससे परिणाम निकलेंगे, उससे दुनिया को बहुत फायदा होगा। और सभी देशों में बंजर जमीन कम होने से रोजगार पर भी अच्छा परिणाम होता है, जीवन यापन भी होता है, शहर की ओर माइग्रेशन रुकता है, और उसके साथ साथ कार्बन एमिशन जो हमारे बड़ी समस्या है उसमें भी सुधार आता है। जैसे भारत ने 25,000 स्क्वायर किलोमीटर ट्री कवर पिछले 5 साल में बढ़ाया है। तो ये ऐसे अनेक काम किए जा सकते हैं जिससे लैंड रिस्टोर होती है, वो फॉरेस्ट में भी और आउट ऑफ फॉरेस्ट ऑल्सो। और इसलिए ये COP सम्मेलन बहुत उपयोगी होगा, और मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि UNCCD के पदाधिकारी, सभी देशों के मंत्री और प्रतिनिधि इस व्यवस्था से भी प्रसन्न रहेंगे और अच्छा डिलिबरेशंस करेंगे। अब क्वेश्चंस टू UNCCD सेक्रेटरी।
Thank you. So we'll open the floor to questions, and I'll take them in rounds of 5-10 minutes until our time is up. So I'll just take 5 questions to start with. Yes, please. Please introduce yourself before you ask your question, and let us know who you're directing it to. Thank you.
My question is to Mr. Chiao, and I'm Ajit Jha from UNI, United News of India. I just want to know that, as Minister had said, that problem is local and solution has to be local. But then somewhere it seems that politically UNCCD is not able to convince the world that we have to come together to address this problem. Climate change is a big issue. So what will be your political approach in this scope?
Shall I respond?
No, next.
Yes. One by one.
My question is to the Executive Secretary. What, according to you, would be a successful outcome of this conference? I know Mr. Javdekar has talked about the Delhi Declaration, but what, according to you, would be a successful end of this convention? And of course, Mr. Javdekar, if you can also add a bit to that as well.
Hi, my question is to Mr. Secretary.
Please introduce yourself. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Ishan. I write for a magazine called Down to Earth. My question is, so a major chunk of interventions, the intervention of choice in most of the countries is afforestation. Now, in land-scarce countries like India, where there's already a lot of land conflict, how will this intervention, afforestation, impact the land tenurial security which you talked about? Thank you.
Yes, please.
My name is Nivedita. I have a question. What kind of gender action plan you have on agenda? What kind of outcome you are looking at in this case?
Thank you. Yes. Put on the microphone.
Hello, sir. My question is to you, Mr. Javdekar. Well, since the last year, we have seen, floods in Kerala, and we've seen some devastating effects, and scientists have linked this to climate change. What are the action plans we have, or the government is thinking on, to bring down the emissions from the coal sector?
Okay, let's take those first, and then we'll come back.
Thank you very much. Land degradation is the way it happens is that human activity has an action that is indeed local. But this doesn't mean that you do not need international cooperation. This does not mean that you should not work on activities that may have been undertaken at a local level, for example, to produce food or coffee or banana or plantation, but the consumption is happening miles away, thousands of miles, thousands of kilometers away. Therefore, it is very important to understand this notion of what we call telecoupling. I live in Germany, but I'm absolutely certain that the coffee I'm drinking in Germany is not produced locally. Therefore, what is the impact of my coffee consumption on land elsewhere? I also know that the banana I consume there conscious about the impact of my consumption on the land. Therefore, whilst the action is local, it is very clear to understand the interconnections between all of these issues. How are we going to address this from the political point of view? The UNCCD, as said, has been negotiated time as the Climate Convention and as the Biodiversity Convention for a very good reason, because these are the three pieces of one puzzle. The way we think the world should understand action on land degradation is to understand the connection between land restoration and economy, social, health, poverty alleviation, security, international cooperation. So our message to political leaders is to say, don't look at land restoration as only a biophysical aspect. Because yes, you are acting locally, but you are not doing it without a purpose. You are doing it to respond to the needs of communities. In most cases, you will see the correlation between land degradation and poverty. The poorest people in the world are found in land that is degraded because rich people go elsewhere, and because it is not easy to promote development when the foundation of your development, which is land and nature, is already depleted. So it is certainly the way we would like to address this from the political point of view, and to also demonstrate that any action on land has multiple effects on climate, on biodiversity, on peace, security, etc., etc. What can we define as a successful outcome for this conference of the parties? We have 30 decisions that are being negotiated today. And of course, having all these 30 decisions from science, technology, from political issues, from work program and budget, from gender perspective, I'll come back to the issue of gender. All of these are very important issues that should be dealt with and negotiated line by negotiators. So it's a very important outcome. It may not be visible to the press, it may not be visible to the ordinary people, but that is the body of legislation that you built for any international treaty. The minister spoke about the Delhi Declaration, a very important outcome for public consumption and for to provide guidance and to inspire the world about what is happening, and I'm sure you will be inspired by the declaration that is being negotiated at the moment. Some of the sticky issues that I mentioned earlier on, what will be the guidance from the COP on how to deal with a very complex issue like drought? Because you know, drought is not something that is addressed by one line ministry. It is the ministry in charge of environment, forestry, agriculture, fisheries, economy, planning, livestock. It's a very complex issue. So therefore, what guidance can be provided by this conference of the parties after multiple consultations, and certainly what is coming next. So a successful outcome for any COP, first and foremost, is to have that COP run smoothly. The conditions are already met for that to happen. Secondly is to have a body of legislation, and thirdly is the political outcome that will come, and the declaration is a political outcome. If I may, Minister, I think there was a question addressed to you, but I'll just give my perspectives on the issue of land and security. Land and security?
No, that was flood.
No, flood I'm not going to touch. I cannot respond to that. That's too difficult for me. The connections between land and security, it may not be very clear to many. But again, I come from the part of the world where land and security issues are becoming extremely explosive. You know, in Africa right now, you have 1.1 billion people, and there will be 1.5 by the middle of this century, probably 2 billion by the end of the century. So you will have more people in Africa than in India in the future. The pressure on land is enormous. But when you go to some parts of the continent where land and water are scarce, where natural resources are scarce, the competition is transformed into a conflict. For example, a conflict between farmers and pastoralists that use the same land, the same water points, and are competing therefore for access, even for access to firewood is a problem in some parts of the continent. So you see at the moment there are lots of conflicts between communities, some doing farming, some doing pastoralism. It happens that these communities are not from the same tribes. Therefore, what was a conflict over access to land and water becomes a tribal conflict or an ethnic conflict. And it becomes just a nightmare for leaders who find themselves in a situation where they don't understand why these people are fighting. It is not that they don't like each other. They are fighting because they are competing for a scarce resource. Gender is one of the very important elements that we have to deal with in any country in the world, especially in countries that are more dependent from the primary sector. The issue is that in most parts of the world, women do not have access to land. They do not have access to land property, and therefore they do not have access to financing. They cannot have access to banks or any other source of financing since they don't own the land. And yet they are producers. They generate income for their families, but there will be no development until that bottleneck is resolved. So gender is not just a mere participation, it is actually a full development plan that should be developed in many parts of the world. For, again, taking the example of Africa that I'm much more familiar with than the example of India, but I guess the situation is not that different, where in some parts, up to 75% of the farmers are actually women, because most men have migrated to the city or to internationally, and women are left with the burden of supporting the families, but they don't own the land. And traditions are still there. There's a very heavy traditional body of legislation there that does not allow that issue to be resolved. So it is important that this be looked at very seriously by governments and by civil society organizations. Minister, the question on flooding is too difficult for me to respond. I'm sure you do have the response for that.
You asked me a question about floods latest. See, there is no direct established correlation between floods and climate change. But from climate change is a reality which is impacting the world, and there are 2-3 definite patterns coming out. 1, rising temperature. 2, rising earth temperature. 3, occurrence of frequency of unnatural events have increased. As you know, in India, what we witnessed last 1 month, floods from Kerala to Assam were all floods because of heavy rain in a short span of time. It's a peculiar phase. And therefore, this scientists are analyzing, but our job is to clean and do more actions on climate change, more protection of biodiversity, and stopping further degradation and achieve degradation neutral condition as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay. Looking at my time, I realize that the two principals have another function and I do not want them to arrive there sweating and huffing and puffing. So if you'll allow me, since they will be with us for the rest of the 2 weeks, we will close this press conference. And I want to thank you, Your Excellency, Executive Secretary, for taking the time to share your thoughts with us. We know both of you are very busy, and we will look forward to meeting with you later on. Colleagues, let us remain seated as the Minister and Executive Secretary head to the hoisting of the flag, and we can follow them there. Thank you.
After flag hosting, there will be opening of exhibition, which is worth watching. Please join.